Reporters for Vice News travel the world, putting a human face to the world's most important stories.
There's a solid wall of riot police officers.
But now, we introduce you to them.
They're doing CPR on one of the casualties here. We don't know if he's going to make it.
This is Field Notes, a show that sits down with our reporters to find out the stories behind their stories and how they got so close to the action.
Feeling pretty good about that?
In this episode, we hear from a team that set out to find the future of the GOP. But they did it by taking a road trip through a place with every type of conservative imaginable, Texas.
Go.
Any criticisms of the president?
No.
Nothing.
I don't think so.
4 years.
4 years. I don't think I ever came
Not
against
a single thing.
I don't think so.
Oh dear.
I
It's a bit
felt-
cultish, isn't it?
It's not cultish. The things I disagree with are things that, he's human. So maybe we don't see eye to eye on all the things,
Yeah.
but the common core thing that he was running on, I believed in.
I'm really excited to talk to you guys because not only have I worked very closely with all of you over the years, but you spent a long time in Texas trying to chronicle the aftermath of the 2020 election and what the fuck the GOP is going to be up to over the next how many years. And it was pretty nuts, right? Lots of hand-wringing in Washington about what it means to be a conservative Republican these days post-Trump. What did it feel like? What did you hear about from actual voters, actual people on the ground in Texas?
I would amend that in one way. It's what it is to be a Republican.
Okay.
There is no such thing as a conservative anymore. I mean, there's no united set of principles. I mean, there's a culture war thing that we tried to include in the piece because everyone says these things that kind of basically aren't true, but it is true in the world.
Can you give me an example? What do you mean?
It's always like, things have changed so much that, if you say anything, you're going to be accused of an ism, you're going to be called an ist, whatever it might be, sexist, homophobic, et cetera. And that's always, and they love Trump for that, right? It's like the, fighting against the PC media, et cetera. So that's kind of the one through line that you always see. But on every other policy, it's all over the place. I mean, there used to be a united front on tax policy amongst Republicans, right? Donald Trump spent like a drunken sailor who was also on drugs. It was like the worst I've ever seen. And it was the worst, actually, adjusted for inflation, than Obama, which every Republican during the Obama administration was saying, this presages socialism in America. The state has taken over private industry, et cetera. And we did the same thing under Donald Trump and no one noticed. Well, they noticed, they tried not to notice. So when you realize that there's a collapse of Republican principle, we were trying to find out in some way of like, okay, so what is it that unites you people? And why are you getting behind this one man? Because you're still behind him, right? And you see all this behavior on Capitol Hill, particularly when it comes to Liz Cheney, who is very conservative, like an actual conservative, and been run out of leadership by Kevin McCarthy and by all these people in the House because of Donald Trump. Well, Donald Trump lost the election.
Yes.
I talked to a Congressman, Peter Meyer, representative from Michigan, and I said to him, how many people on the Hill in your party believe this stuff about the election? I know how many say it, but how many actually believe it? And he said, 5? I was like, 5%? He said, no, 5. Probably about 5 people. And all of them are not mugging for Donald Trump, they're mugging for his voters. They see 75 million voters voting for Donald Trump, and they're like, we have to keep them on board with us, and the way to do that is to act like Donald Trump. And we saw a lot of those voters in Texas.
So it's not about principles or ideology anymore. It's kind of attitude. It's a kind of personality, right? And Trump maybe is the personification of that attitude.
It's a leader cult, yeah.
It's a leader cult, right?
Yeah.
So my question to you, Sean, is in producing this film, which it's almost a feature documentary. It's quite a deep dive. It's a road trip through Texas. First question, why Texas? Why'd you choose that as a place to examine this phenomenon? And secondly, how did you try to understand the spectrum of those who are not conservative, but Republicans under the Donald Trump era today?
I mean, we chose Texas because it's the largest electoral state, for Republicans. And so it's like, as Texas goes, so does the rest of the country. It's like one of those just linchpin states. The other one was just the fact that this kind of thing has been in the news for years now about Texas going purple. All these people who are moving there, demographics are changing, and it didn't. Trump still won by like 600,000 votes, I think. So there was some interesting statistics that came out, revealing kind of why that happened. And we particularly talked about this after the election, saying like, we should wait till things settle down a little bit and then go kind of do this assessment in a time where the election, there isn't an election that's close at hand. Like, because we really wanted to get a sense of how people feel. Because people talk a certain way in the months leading into election. We were really looking for the kind of Republican voters that don't typically speak, kind of like centrist Republicans, I guess you could say. Like people who voted for Trump because of the policy, not because of the man. And it was very difficult.
And Katie, you produced the piece. Given your experience, like what surprised you about what you were expecting, what you didn't expect?
The fact that almost to a person, the voters that we were talking to don't believe that Joe Biden won the election. There's just this sincere denial. They've entirely bought the narrative. I think the other thing that was surprising was nobody really knows still what's next. Every time we talk to somebody about, okay, so if Trump doesn't run in 2024, who would you like to see? It was just kind of, no, Trump, we want Trump. Yeah. And then kind of fumbling, and maybe, Ron DeSantis got thrown out a bunch.
Or a member of the Trump family.
Or just a Trump, any Trump, the
Tiffany,
Trumps.
I think, was
yeah.
second on the list.
I cannot see any other Republican than a Trump running for president.
We spend so much time talking to people who eat, sleep, and breathe politics in a very specific way.
Yeah.
And then it was nice to actually get out and talk to voters and see that they consume political news so entirely differently and have such different priorities and prerogatives than what I think we all make assumptions about.
Given how many of the people you talk to believe the lie that the election was stolen from Trump, does that, it's concerning, but is it so ingrained in people's thinking that it can't be unlearned, so to speak? It's a hard question, but I think that's I think that's what's at the core of what I took away from the piece. Not only the diversity of Republicans in Texas, but can you unlearn this lie so that we can all live in the same world?
You can unlearn the lie in a natural time way. It's like, a bad breakup. Time heals all wounds. What will end up happening is that if you look at the Tea Party, which was the harbinger of a lot of stuff to come in the Republican Party, is that so many of those people abandoned the principles of the Tea Party when the wind changed a little bit. There was a populist moment. They're very savvy operators, and they exploited that. This is the thing that the Milton Friedmanites have a problem with, is that all the policies that you love, the voters don't actually love, and Donald Trump really tapped into that.
And I wonder if this is an unsaid thing about a lot of the people who are trying to claim asylum in the U.S. now are from Northern Triangle countries, not from Mexico, not from the border.
That's right.
And we talk about republicanism as being strong borders, and there's maybe a misconception that if you're Latino, you probably want a more compassionate border scenario for people who are claiming asylum. Was it interesting to see a voicing from a Tejano population saying you know what, they're folks from, they don't say it out loud, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not saying these are people from the Northern Triangle, so we don't find common cause with it. But given the coverage we've done on the border, how did that one scene register to you?
Yeah, it actually, I was thinking about it a lot while we were down there, because it's we were in McAllen in 2018, you know what I mean? When everything was happening. And I think something that was so surprising was almost to a person, it felt my parents came over the right way, or my parents came over when you still could come over. It was this almost bootstraps mentality of no, I did it, my family did it the right way. We have every right to be here. We don't need more, people coming in. And it was, again, never explicit, much more nuanced.
Yeah, it was very security-minded.
We left water out for undocumented immigrants. We lent out a phone whenever they needed to talk to somebody. We were always very pro immigrants, and we still are. The reality is you don't know who's coming in.
The point that Donald Trump made.
And it is a point.
They were talking about traffickers, drug traffickers who were now making money on human trafficking, talking about safety, which is often a huge Republican concern. They always want to spend a lot of money on the DOD. It feels like it aligns with the same stuff. It's that same sentiment.
So that's kind of consistent then, right? Yes. That's consistent over the last 30, 40 years on Republican talking points about the border. So the border remains somewhat consistent, but maybe not the fiscal discipline, and maybe not the well, who knows what. But this is a question I want to ask for you, Sean, because as the supervising producer of the piece, I believe that's your title, is that right?
I think that's the title they gave me.
This guy
I
likes
call
to
him boss man.
Boss man,
That's
right?
all I know.
Great.
I know that this guy likes to talk a lot, and I know that you guys were there for a long time talking to a lot of people. Tell me about the editing challenge, because Rachel Wynn, one of our editors, was on it.
It was a challenge.
Talk to me about the editing
Are
challenge.
you saying that I'm the editing challenge person?
Yeah, I'm saying it without saying it, but I guess
You
it's your
kind
job
of
to
did
say
say it at one point. You're right.
But
It was a
structurally
challenge.
speaking, I suppose is the question, right?
Yeah, no, it was a challenge, but it was, but mainly I think because everyone we meet had their guard up in the beginning, and I think Michael had to, get them at ease, like kind of like make them feel like they can trust us. You're coming in as like this New York media company, and from New York City, and they immediately have this opinion.
Do you remember the rooftop Republicans?
Oh, yeah, I mean-
that was the last scene of a Republicans that get together every week at a Mexican restaurant, which is quite funny.
Yeah.
And they were not hostile, but skeptical is probably the better word. And, I had to do like a 25-minute preamble to say, we're not here to burn you.
Yeah.
We're not here to make you look stupid, because that enlightens nobody.
Both coasts look at us as a bunch of backwoods cretin, and we're not. He's a retired judge. I've got a PhD. There are various other people around here who are educated, intelligent, been a lot of places, done a lot of things, and we're tired of being laughed at. You look at the stuff that comes out of Hollywood, and you don't see a central white family or even a minor mixed family. There's 3 queers, 2 lesbians, 13 Martians, and a bunch of...
I've missed this film, but I'm sure it's on Netflix.
That's the central idea of who we are.
So you feel condescended to by the media and just by the culture in general? I mean, I'm not going to get through to them. It ruins the interview. It becomes a pugilistic thing. And I just want to know, where is it that you get that idea? And where does that come from? And people tend to open up when they realize that, like, you're not there to make them look foolish. And as I say to them always, it's like, only you can make yourself look foolish.
Yeah.
And sometimes they do, but...
I mean, it's like the mission of the piece going in was for us we have these 2 kind of media kind of like galaxies that are just like drifting apart, and it's an attempt to try to like find some place in the middle, and that was the whole thing. And it's a challenge. I mean, that's why those things took a long time to shoot, every single part. And God bless Rachel for going
stitching
through
that together,
just hours and hours of elliptical conversations.
Well, that was something I was very impressed by the piece, but I mean, not surprised by. So you're still pushing people as to why, how, what does that mean? And I think that was done really successfully. And I think the reason that it's important, and you tell me what you think about the statement, is like, it's really easy to think about the 2 universes drifting apart and go like us versus them, or think of an us and them, but like, we are stitched together by way of our nationhood. And like, this is an important time to understand one of the major political parties of the country and the people who support it. So like, empathy, right? It's a word we throw around a lot. But Katie, tell me about like thinking through this project outside the Beltway, outside of like politicians and pundits, and like how empathy, whenever you want to describe it as, sort of motivated it.
We knew who we wanted to talk to, generally in buckets. But I think something that worked to our advantage was not overproducing each and every single conversation. One of the most empathetic conversations was with Jamin Roller, the pastor at Citizens Church. A lot of what he had to say really got to the heart of that.
It's a little uncharitable and unfair that we try to follow people's words or values or morals and then immediately fit them or situate them into one camp or the other. And people are complex.
We went in expecting to talk about evangelicals and Supreme Court justices and all of that kind of stuff. What we ended up walking away with from that conversation was, how do we all treat and talk to other Americans as actual Americans and just kind of start to get away as much as we can from this divisiveness, and if that's possible, with what the last 5 years looked like.
This is the issue with the modern Republican Party, is people like evangelicals, a shrinking demographic, but still a huge demographic. What do you do?
Yeah.
This is a guy who's going to give you 3 Supreme Court justices, which he did. And he's also going to say, grab him by the blank, and, porn stars were suing him. And it's like the opposite of the kind of, what you want to be like a Mitt Romney type, who's like a straight kind of guy. You get the absolute opposite of that. New York, loudmouth, kind of pervy guy, and he's going to get you things. So the other guy's definitely not going to. How do you do that? And they, after 5 years, have not figured that out.
But is it, so okay, to me, that whole argument boils down to the Lord works in mysterious ways, right? A messenger of the Lord can be an imperfect person, right? So the imperfect person, let's talk about the next Trump, right? Even if it isn't Donald Trump, the power that he has over people who vote for him, who believe in his attitude, personality, in what he's delivered to their constituency, in being strong against the border, like with border security, that is now a template for a successful national Republican
100%.
candidate. Yeah. And we're not, I'm not going to predict the future, but it's going to be very difficult for other people in the party to be the standard bearer given what we've seen now. And this is the last question, lightning round. I want to hear from all of you. After party, you made a great film, talked to a lot of cool people. It was fun, which I think was really important. And it had some heart. But what's the light at the end of the tunnel here? Like, is there a future where there isn't one party that's slowly drifting down the QAnon rabbit hole, and we can try to think about how to solve the problems of the future? Like, what's the way out for the Republican Party? What did you guys learn?
I mean, I think that I'm almost cautiously optimistic in that regard, because specifically when it comes to QAnon, didn't really come up. Cool. It was not. If anything, Michael was saying it in some sort of prelude to something, and but people were not fully grasping onto that. And I think that that's something that we're starting to see maybe a little bit of people starting to flake off, and people who are kind of coming back to center.
Doing more things like this in general is important, I think. Trying to find common ground. That's going to be the challenge for leaders going forward, is just, creating that sense of no, we're all in this together. And is that Biden? I don't know, but everybody has to recognize that Trump did change politics in the United States. He figured out something that nobody else had done. He broke a bunch of rules that people thought you couldn't break. And, everybody has to kind of acknowledge that going forward. While Trump is gone, Trumpism is not. And, populism is definitely going to be with us, not just in the Republican Party, it's going to be in politics.
I'll put my cards on the table and be honest with my own opinion, because if people think that journalists don't have their own opinion, look at my Twitter feed. I don't like populism. I think it's a poison in American and European politics. It would be really poison if there was a Republican who was good at populism. Imagine somebody like Donald Trump with a little bit slicker veneer that was not turning off suburban voters. I mean, the people who ran away from Donald Trump in 2020, white men. That was the biggest loss amongst Trump voters. And those are people who are alienated by this type of politics. But, what's going to change the Republican Party is a lot of losses. This being such a flip in 4 years, we have a radical new president who's going to do things differently, and then 4 years later, it's all gone. Even in we look in the Middle East, the Abraham Accords, great achievement, gone. All of this stuff is gone. That is transitory. And if the Republican Party cannot keep itself in elected office, then they are going to have a meeting of the RNC going, what the fuck happened and how do we become a real party again? And it has to get to that for them to change.
Well, on that note, my friends, my colleagues, thank you for the work you did. Thanks.
Thank you, Christian.
Thanks.